Hello and welcome to Radio Free Nintendo. James, the usual host, is away. In the meantime, apparently I've been randomly selected. I don't know how randomly. He seemed to, make his mind for...
It seemed to be planned. It seemed pretty planned.
Yeah, I don't think, he threw a dice or anything like that, Anyway, whatever. So, I'm the host, and we all have to deal with it. It is Thursday, August 17th, 2023. This is episode 836. And we're gonna go straight into it because I like to run in tight shit. Almost as much as I like to say things like running a tight ship. So, Greg, why don't we start with you for new business?
Yeah, it's pretty light still. I've been plugging away at Theatre Rhythm on Switch, just the odd song here there, but nothing particularly much more to say about that. So I guess the only thing I'll talk about for now is been playing Minish Cap on the GBA expansion pack NSO service. I guess really you could sort of blame the oracles coming out for this, I think, because it was a kind of a case of when those GBC games came out, it was like, oh yeah, I did start Minish Cap when the GBA games first went up, early in the year, just testing out a number of the games that went up in that sort of first batch, and then kind of a bunch of other stuff, including Tears of the Kingdom came along and kind of knocked me off that, and I thought, I should go back to that because it's been longer since I've played through the Minish Cap than it has been either of the Oracle's games, I believe. Although none of them has been a recent playthrough, but just the fact that the Oracle... Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, they came out on the 3DS, like the Game Boy Virtual Console. Of course, Minish Cap was an ambassador title.
It was,
but
yeah.
that came with all sorts of things that made it not super interesting to play on the 3DS.
Yeah, that is the crux of it, basically. The fact that the Oracle games came to Virtual Console, I had a playthrough on that, whereas, I'm sure I looked at the Minish Cap on the Ambassador version and stuff, but I definitely didn't play through it. I have played through it multiple times, I believe, because I think when as I'm sure we've covered a fair few times over the years, there was a bit of a sort of switcheroo that they did in Europe versus America for the end of 2004. So in America, the DS came out. In Europe, the Minish Cap came out. I was not a very early DS adopter. I even didn't get it when it launched in Europe. It was a few months later, in the summer of 2005, by the time I had a DS. But I did get Minish Cap straight away, so that's what I was playing at the end of 2004. But at that stage, I was probably played it mostly on my GBA player, to be honest, on the TV. And then, put it in my launch day GBA, here there for some portable play sessions. And then I would have definitely, I think, gone back to it, and sort of played around with it a bit once I had the DS. And, obviously that was a much better portable experience than that launch day GBA with, being able to see the screen and all that. And then also a bit later, I had a Game Boy Micro when they were selling those off sort of cheap from the sort of excess Japanese stock, so I think I played quite a bit of it on a second playthrough on the GB Micro as well. So it's certainly a game, I played a lot. In fact, I think it's the first time I'm pretty sure, it's all very long time ago, only 20 years of course, but I'm pretty sure I played it damn near to exhaustion. I think I might have done all the Kinstone fusions, which if you are familiar with the Minish Cap at all, you should know, there are very many of those, virtually not every, but a great many of the NPCs you can fuse a Kinstone with. They have these sort of thought bubbles that come out of their heads, and just you press the left shoulder button, and then you can, if you've got a matching stone, you can do that, and it triggers something from an assortment of things that it triggers, things you can find on the overworld. Another Kinstone fusion essentially, because a different NPC will turn up or in the castle town or all sorts of things. But, so I played it very thoroughly once upon a time, but, not that good of a working memory of it this time. So I've been, picking my way through, and also just had to kind of, find where I was, from leaving off earlier in the year, having done one dungeon or whatever. So it took a little bit of time to get going again, but, I've kind of, gone pretty nicely now. I think I'm just getting it early in the second half of the game by now. And, I like the kind of mashup of like all things Zelda from the sort of late 90s, early aughts that it kind of represents. We've got a lot of Ocarina in there, musically with a bunch of the NPCs, but you also get a lot of Wind Waker in there with the, that design for Link and quite a number of enemies and other NPCs and things, that feature in the game. But then, of course, it also owes a great deal to the top-down Zeldas, being, as it is, a top-down sprite-based Zelda, in particular, those Oracle games, that were also developed by Flagship, and, even, of course, you go back to, Link's Awakening that they owe a fair deal to, and that, of course, owes a lot to A Link to the Past. So it just feel like this big mashup of all this sort of Zelda stuff, and it just, I guess the nicest thing it's always about it is it's one of the, you've got Four Swords Adventures as well, that of course was on GameCube, and so was higher resolution than this. But I think this in some ways is for a sort of relatively mainline game anyway, is like the apex of Zelda sprite art, really. And it is very, very nice. It's just got this feel that's like a little less, I don't know, there's something wonky about A Link to the Past to me. Like, it's a relatively early Super Nintendo game. I don't know, it just, some of the stuff with the perspective and the art style, it just seems a little bit kind of utilitarian and at times just like not quite like right. You know what I mean? It does this because it's marrying that more sort of flourishing Wind Waker style to the top-down Zelda look. It's just got more personality. It has got that more flourish about it that I personally like a bit more than that. As much as I absolutely adore Link to the Past, and that the images of that game will be burned in my brain forever as like the first Zelda game I ever played, and really to a fair degree, one of the first games of just that type I really put that much kind of time into. But it looks really nice. It's got great animation. And then you've got that kind of additional level of aesthetic variety with the whole Minish concept, of shrinking down, and there's kind of, instead of the kind of dual world thing that was very popular with top-down Zeldas, with A Link to the Past and Oracle of Ages, you've got this world within a world of the world of the little people, the Minish people, and, when you go to those sorts of spaces, it has like an additional level of like detail and just like a slightly different look to convey this sense that, okay, it's not, if it did look just exactly the same, but trust me, you're small now, it wouldn't, you know what I mean? Like, it wouldn't work as well. They aesthetically put some touches in to just kind of sell it that bit more, that extra bit of detail of like, sort of like kind of parallax layers in the top down construction. So it's like, okay, he's just like some ordinary kind of leaves and reeds and stuff, but they're huge now and they cast these long shadows and all this kind of stuff. Like, they just, obviously it's GBA graphics. It's not like way beyond, Super Nintendo at all. In some ways, GBA was not as capable as Super Nintendo, like in the resolution department. But I think, it's more of a sort of triumph of the aesthetic than it is the technical, with that. And it just, I've always liked the way it looks, and, revisiting it now, on, a good display and all that, it kind of shows them off, and I've been enjoying that. And then gameplay wise, there's some interesting perspective to be had for me playing it now versus, playing it in the tail end of the aughts or whatever, because of course, since that time, a lot of some of the developers, including, at the director level that worked at this have been, integrated from flagship, Capcom company into Nintendo's internal teams and have become, at the very highest levels of the Zelda team, including working on, Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom. So it's kind of interesting looking back at this with that in mind. And I think actually the thing that struck me the most was, you've got this overworld that obviously is fairly reminiscent of something like Link to the Past or Link's Awakening. But some of these kinds of asymmetric elements where it's like, okay, the first time you go to a place, there's, tends to be like these sort of roads or little narrow gaps that have a pit in them where like there's a boulder nearby that will fill in the pit, and then you'll be able to use that little road or whatever it might be, that little gap, to easily go to a place. But you're going to have to sort of go the long way around the first time, or have a particular item that allows you to go that long way around to do that. And then once you've kind of done that, let me just come round the back, as it were, push the boulder in, and now traversal is easy. If I want to go from this square of the map to this other square of the map, I just go from left to right exactly as I would expect. But the first time, it's never that simple. And that principle was very much applied in Skyward Sword, which I think Fujibayashi also directed, if I remember correctly. I think that was kind of when he took over from Aonuma, who kind of worked on the preceding. Had been like the general producer, director, however they tended to categorize it on things like Twilight Princess. That is when they talked about the build up to Skyward Sword, there was a lot of, we want to blend the kind of the dungeons and the overworld together and make the overworlds more interesting because they hadn't been that interesting in the 3D Zeldas before that. And that's, I suppose, in many ways, that is what they were talking about. As I said, they talked about it more of like making it more like the dungeons, but they could have just said make it more like Minish Cap, but in 3D, because that is what's happening here, really. It's just like, rather than, Hyrule Field, N64, it's just an expanse. And, there's not really anything stopping you from going to, whichever point you need to get to on that map. You could get there a bit quicker when you get the horse or whatever, but really it's just like, it's an open space. You want to go wherever you want to go, you just go there. Whereas, Link to the Past, Minish Cap, I think even more so, it just feels like it's, this sort of dense overworld that's got these sort of almost Metroid-y elements to it. To a degree of like, you've got this, the first time you go somewhere, it's this kind of relatively complicated little journey, but at the end of that journey, you sort of secure the means to make it a very simple return journey, if and when, you need to make that. And, a lot of the time, it's this just, you get to push the boulder in the pit, and now it's a flat surface, but there are other mechanisms that achieve the same thing. But I distinctly remember, I've not played Skyward Sword in quite some time now either, and I do still have the option of going to the Switch version at some point. But right. I do have distinct memories of moments precisely like that in 3D, in the, on the ground in Skyward Sword. So, when not in a dungeon, but, in those sort of, playgrounds on the surface world that they made, which, I think there was quite a bit of good design in there. They just tried to get too much out of them. There's just like, for what they were, I think there was good work, but it's like, no, we still haven't got enough hours yet. So, flood it and make it collect all the tad tones, or, run around chasing the Tears of Light or whatever they're called, but they kind of pushed it a bit too far. But I think fundamentally, I quite like that idea of having the overworld be more like the 2D overworlds in 3D rather than, a big sea. Or, the Hyrule Field on N64, or even Twilight Princess, which, didn't it tried a bit, but it wasn't desperately interesting as best I remember it. So it's been fun to see it with that slightly different perspective. And also a little something that kind of reminds me a bit of Skyward Sword as well, I'd say, is a slightly oddball items, you know, a little bit off the beaten path of the usual Zelda, you know, kind of progression that we got very used to, thanks to games like A Link to the Past, Ocarina, Wind Waker, and Twilight Princess. Is the hookshot, the bow and arrow, and so forth, the boomerang. Quite a few of them are here, of course, but you know, you also have like your sort of your gust jar, which you kind of use you know, for various things, including like you sort of draw these like mushrooms towards you and then they fling you over a gap, or the mole mitts to go like tunneling through soft earth and all this kind of stuff. It just reminds me more of stuff like, you know, the Gust Bellows in Skyward Sword and stuff that actually like tried to say, yeah, you know, we realise we've done some of these items a fair few times, so let's try and come up with some that feel a bit more novel. Kind of feel like they hit that spot with the 2D games at Minish Cap, and then, you know, it took them a few more years before they reached that point with the 3D games. But yeah, it's been fun, and I imagine I'll probably you know, actually, because I don't think it's that terribly long to just see the end game anyway. No, I don't know about doing all the kinstones and all that, but I feel like I'll probably see it through to that final boss.
Yeah, and you don't feel like maybe it's got kind of an off-brand Zelda feel? Like, I don't know what bothered me so much about the Oracle games and Minish Cap, but I never held them in, you know, that high esteem that I reserved for, you know, the mainline Zelda games or whatever. I always felt like they kind of felt like they were made by a different team in a way that I didn't really like. You know,
yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. They do feel a little bit like, to me, not so. I don't know about off-brand, but like I said, like they're, you know, the way that they try to incorporate so many sort of elements of other Zelda games. You know, like, because the Oracle games are like, obviously, Wind Waker didn't exist yet when the Oracle Ages and Seasons came out, but it was very much like, okay, you know, Ocarina is the best-selling Zelda game, one of the best-selling N64 games. So it's like, okay, make so many things like Ocarina, isn't it? You know, we have, you know, Gorons and Zoras and all that. They look the way they did, you know, all these other kind of ancillary characters. So I feel like, you know, that in some ways, I like, particularly with Minish Cap, I do like this sort of composite thing of, you know, all this Zelda stuff from this time where Zelda, you know, had this kind of moment in the sun relatively before, obviously it's very much having another one now, you know, with, how well commercially, you know, these, past couple of Switch Zeldas have done. But in some ways you could also look at it as it kind of lacks a bit of its own identity. Like, it's just like, okay, let's just, you know, pick up these different bits and bobs from other Zelda games and like mash them together. So it always does feel a little bit like, you know, yeah, you know, A Link to the Past, Link's Awakening, they were the true trailblazers. And this just kind of follows in their path and tries to do as kind of creditable a job as it can, and like work some stuff in from the more contemporary 3D games while it's at it, you know. But and that's not probably an unfair description of the games, but I think they do a creditable job. They are, you know, pretty well done. And I guess the one thing to mention with the sort of going from the Oracle games and Link's Awakening is you do have 2 extra buttons with the shoulder buttons, but they don't make the best use out of them. I think I probably mentioned this even when I just dabbled with it on the, you know, when the expansion pack first went up. That, the GBA part of the expansion pack, I should say, in that, like, the left shoulder button is like largely dedicated to the kinstone fusions, which is bizarre because that's a contextual thing. So why does it only do that? I don't know. And then, yes, the right shoulder button is more useful, but it is for contextual actions, the way that the A button is in Ocarina of Time, for instance. So this lightens some of the load that you had from the Game Boy Zeldas, but still you have B and A for your items, and a lot of the time you're going to want B for your sword, which means all the other items are getting switched among using the A button. And that is going to mean quite a lot of trips to the pause menu. And, that's one of the things that the Link's Awakening remake, one of the very few things really that it had to clean up about that game was just, let's have some more, face buttons and less item switching. And now the flow of the game is nicer and there really isn't much you can find fault with it at that point, I think. And so with this, there is still some of that, even though they did have more buttons. So that also kind of, again, I've said this before, Link to the Past doesn't make particularly good use of all those buttons on the Super Nintendo controller either. So, I mean, they were really, they made some strange decisions sometimes with the buttons available to them, including, like Super Metroid. Like, the exception I would say is like the GBA Metroids, like they did that was right. Like GBA Metroids have better controls with fewer buttons than Super Metroid does, so they did something right there. Whereas a lot of the other times,
I almost wonder sometimes if that's almost like a philosophical sort of we don't want to overwhelm the player sort of thing.
Could be
on some levels, like. Like as if there was an aversion to using the shoulder buttons for anything important.
Yeah, it could be that. Also, I suppose there's an element maybe they perceived of continuity with the Oracle games of like, a lot of people who play the Oracle games are going to be playing this. Like maybe we want to keep it pretty similar. There's a reference to the Oracle games because you have the sort of the sages, the kind of the goddesses or whatever, like at the inn looking for a room or something. So. They're clearly kind of aware that, people would have, that's another of the games they reference and stuff. So maybe they just thought, people are used to this. So, we'll broadly keep it the same. And the shoulder buttons are kind of for extra things like kinstones that didn't exist before or some of these contextual actions that didn't exist before. But it's not, if you were starting from scratch, this is not the best use of the inputs for my money.
Yeah.
And most random observation I've got from this is it includes the carpenters from Ocarina of Time are present in the town.
Yeah.
And their leader at one point refers to, I don't know whether it's his own workmen or just what he's looking for in his employees or whatever, as being full of vim and vigor. Which is a phrase that if you played Nintendogs in 2005, which I did, you will have seen a great deal of when you do the sort of competitions with your dog. They refer to, here's this dog looking full of vim and vigor. It's like, who was it at NOA, presumably, that fell in love with this phrase that they had to work into Zelda and Nintendogs in the mid-aughts? So I rather enjoyed that, I must say.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because, first off, I think it's incredibly weird. How weird is it now, 20 years down the line, that Capcom is making a Zelda game? That just seems so strange to me. At the time, it was like, oh, that's kind of cool. Sort of like, Amusement Vision did F-Zero GX. So it wasn't really that weird. Yeah. But now, all the way, like with 2 decades in between, it just seems so strange to make a Zelda game. But also, I'm just looking at the Wikipedia entry here, and this director was Hidemaru Fujibayashi, who actually was hired by Nintendo after he made this game, and then went on, and eventually went on to direct Skyward Sword, Breath of the Wild, and Tears of the Kingdom.
Exactly.
So this is a notable game in the sense that it was the last. It pretty much charted the course of the Zelda franchise for the next 20 years, really.
To a fair degree.
To a certain degree.
To me, like I said, what I see in it is a lot of Skyward Sword, which, kind of was relatively a dead end. But, there are elements in even, of Skyward Sword that carried over to the current sort of Zelda paradigm of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. But, no, it's, I guess, it's just, in the late 90s and the aughts, Nintendo found that, they really need, because of the utter collapse in third-party relations that accompanied their, approach to the N64, they found themselves needing to, publish more games so that there would be more to play on their systems. And this necessarily involved reaching out to more partners to help make the games with them, because they didn't have enough internal developers to be making all this stuff at the same time. And, that definitely included, like you said, quite a lot of the Japanese, the big Japanese companies that, to some extent they'd fallen out with in the second half of the 90s. Capcom, of an old rival like Sega, Namco, who they'd had, weird relations with over the years in terms of Namco were a huge part of the popularization of the Famicom in Japan, the early days, but, they fell out and, they didn't, I think it was just something about, Nintendo kind of, restricting, their sort of, ability, their sort of publishing discretion on Famicom, and then they, ended up essentially back in the Tengen stuff and all this, just essentially, somewhat indirectly pissing in Nintendo's face. They had, especially in the Yamauchi years, there was some stormy weather with these people, but, I guess by the time you got to the 21st century, the imperative was there for them to mend fences and, cooperate with these people. And of course, with Iwata coming in as president, I think that helped do it in a lot of cases. The most high profile case would have been, Square Enix, the kind of, it's Square really, the kind of, accommodation they made about, okay, well, you can be on GBA if we get some exclusive stuff, which ended up being Crystal Chronicles and Tactics Advance and stuff like that. And so, those fences were mended, but that's really kind of what they had to do in the early aughts, both just to get more games out there on their systems, but also just to, rebuild after the kind of scorched earth position.
People forget how dire it was between Nintendo and third parties during during the N64 days and even moving into the GameCube era. They were not popular amongst third parties, and then things got better because Wii sold so much, and then of course, Wii U was just would rather be forgotten about. And then the Switch is just something entirely different, where they're really so many games are being made for it that the whole third-party thing really has become irrelevant, because it's much like the NES, where everybody just wants to make games for it. There's no...
it does, doesn't it? What I just mentioned about the notion of Nintendo's well, you know what? If we don't liaise with a bunch of outside companies and publish more games than we did on the Super Nintendo, there won't be very much to play. That is so many worlds removed from Switch. You know what I mean? I mean, there's just so much to play. It's comical, but that was the sort of position that they used to occupy, after, the N64 era. So, it's, and of course, they relied on Rare quite a lot for the back end of the 90s, but then, they wanted to, the stampers who, founded Rare wanted to sell. Nintendo didn't want to buy, and so they went to Xbox, and then it's well, now we've got even less capacity. So it really was out of necessity to some extent that they kind of made defensive, in particular with the Japanese developers. I guess just rebuilding some of those relationships, I think was really important. And even if the GameCube era in itself wasn't the most wildly successful, particularly that console, but, there were things going on the handheld side as well. And I think just mending fences helped a lot to kind of see them through to, the second half of the decade, which was much, much more successful.
Good points. I don't know how to follow that up. I just was going to nitpick about the collectathon aspect of the Capcom Game Boy games, but it doesn't really fit here. But it does fit with the era that they came out of. It was just the trend to try to extend the content, the hours that you could play any game, really. Okay, let's cram as much crap to find as possible in there. And
in particular,
20
hours is not enough. You got to make it 30. right?
Right. And so the kinstones, maybe they were better than the rings. I don't remember, but the rings, like a lot of them were absolutely like they had no use, right? Like there's no way. Like you were waiting to get a ring that gave you, I don't know, like decreased damage or increases the damage that you dished out or something like that. Like you didn't want basically any other ring. So
yeah, I got it. So obviously, there's a limited amount of the kinstone fusions that are actually required. You know, there are some,
right.
you know, they're required to progress through the main quest and all that. But there's an element of it that does again remind me a little bit of something from Skyward Sword, where it's like, okay, you know, when you're on the surface and you activate those sorts of like treasure chests that will then appear in the sky, or that you'll be able to open them in the sky or something. I forget, like there's an interaction between the two levels, essentially. Which itself is a little bit like kind of getting a treasure map in Wind Waker and then being able to fish it out of the circle of light in the Great Sea. But it is almost like that because it's so sort of disconnected. It's a lot of the time. It's like, okay, I've fused a kidstone with this person and now a treasure chest appears, you know, several grid squares of map away, and I go and get it. You know, it's a bit of a strange concept in some ways, but I guess it's just kind of like, it provides a sort of economy of like having to, you know, if you were having to write like an actual reason for like a proper side quest, you know what I mean? Like, okay, each of these characters has got a little side quest where, you know, for some little story reason, you know, they need help with this, and then, you know, you talk to them and you solve their problem, and then they give you a reward. Like, it kind of streamlines that. Like, everybody's like, no, just match stones with me and something good happens. We don't need to explain it any more than that. It's very utilitarian, you know.
Yeah, just feel like, you know, like in Zelda games before that, you just basically looked for upgrades, maybe for your bow or for heart pieces and Link's Awakening, okay, like the seashells, that's, you know, that's acceptable. But then, yeah, like it was kind of a way to add, they were trying to add loot to Zelda and didn't know how to do that. And I'd say they found a way now. Zelda games have a lot of loot.
Oh, they sure have a lot of that.
Yeah, the rings didn't do it for me. But, all right. So, yeah, I'm still not, you know, it's interesting to hear you talk about Minish Cap, but I'm still not compelled to pick it up again.
Okay, so, well, Guillaume, you made the comment about it feeling like an off-brand Zelda, and I was just wondering, do you feel like, because you could kind of maybe make the same argument about F-Zero GX, do you feel the same way about that game?
Well, I don't, but maybe primarily because I played GX before I played X. Yeah. And I barely played F-Zero on the Super Nintendo, so basically GX is what I knew.
It is F-Zero.
Yeah. And of course, like, it didn't help that in, I think it was Oracle of Seasons, where there's a boss about halfway through the game where you have to dunk bombs onto its head or inside its head, and I was like, and you have to climb up on its the back of its hands that are disembodied, you know, and like they go up and down. Yeah. And I was like, this is so Sigma, you know, like this is so Capcom.
Yeah.
This is not Zelda. But then again, like disembodied giant heads and hands are also a Zelda thing. So I don't know. Like I hadn't played much of Ocarina of Time either back then.
I think you were just looking at it just to like nitpick and see like, aha, there you go. You see, that's not Zelda.
It's also a bit like Gargoyle's Quest or Makaimura, like-ish as well. Like from the Capcom sort of terms of like, you know, like the last boss of Super Ghouls and Ghosts, if you've ever had the privilege of seeing it, you know, it's this bloody great thing where you got to ride so tall that you got to ride this platform all the way up to hurt it. Its head. And I remember I think there is an Oracle's boss that reminded me of that. Not that it's necessarily that difficult or anything, but just the concept of like, I think having to ride the hands up to where you could hurt it. I'm thinking like, is there someone in common here, or just someone who was a fan? It's something that traces back to Capcom there, but yes, that's the thing. If you didn't have Capcom in mind, I probably wouldn't be making that connection. But when you do, that's the sort of thing that your brain does at that point. You're looking for it.
Yeah. All right, John, so there's only one thing I want to hear coming out of your mouth. What have you been playing? I don't know. I'm trying things.
All right.
Running a tight ship.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, you didn't even introduce us, so you
shit!
You're just right into it. Yeah. That's
well,
okay.
We just heard Greg talk about Minish Cap, and now you're John. That's all the listeners need to know.
All right, you're not wrong. Picked up Vampire Survivors on the Switch, and of course I've been playing it on Xbox, and I've also played it on Steam. It's really cheap, so
So why not?
Exactly, why not? It's very unlike me to buy multiple copies of a game. I realize that, but for this I'll make an exception.
Sure.
So I picked up the base game and the 2 expansions. Tides of the Foscari or something like that, and I can't even remember what they are. I can't even remember what they're named. But there's 2 expansions on there that you can pick up as well. And I think the base game's like $4.99, and the expansions are cheap. They're like $2.99 or something like that. The whole thing's really cheap. So it feels really, really good on Switch. I talked about this a bit before, but I think now that I've played it, I've really played deeply into the Xbox version of it. And I'm trying to open up as much stuff on the Steam version as I have opened up on the Xbox version. Of course, with the Switch version, it's the newest version of the game they just released that has co-op in it, which I haven't been able to try. They have couch co-op in it now. They just added that. So this is the first time it's been released on Switch. And of course, for the other versions out there, it's not on PS5 yet. And I don't think there's even a release date for that. They haven't said anything because everybody's asking when it's going to come out on PS5, and it just hasn't yet. So those ones got the update that added couch co-op. So, I really understand the game quite a bit more now and sort of what you have to do. So, for those of you that really haven't played this game or don't know what it's about, you have a set of characters that you can play. It's a survival game with roguelike elements. So you're on a playing field, and you are constantly being swarmed by monsters. And over time, those monster swarms become stronger and more numerous to the point where by the end of the game, the goal is to survive for a half an hour on one of these levels. And then at that point, you sort of fight an end boss a little bit. I still really don't really understand it. Haven't been able to figure it out. But you get you get kind of an end game point after 30 minutes, and you get chased around, and eventually you get killed by a boss, that I don't know if you can even kill or not. It's one of those things I should have looked up at some point, but I just never bothered because I was just enjoying playing the game. And it's really...
I think I've managed to do it.
Yeah?
But you have to have a very specific set of effects in play, and I don't remember exactly how it happened. But yeah, it's hard to talk about because the whole game kind of has a meta aspect to it.
Yeah.
Where it kind of... pretends that you've broken it or stuff like that. So there's a lot of surprises that occur. They keep, making little jokes or whatever. I don't want to spoil anything again, but so when you do kill the boss, I think that, it's something similar to that.
Yeah.
Oh shit, what did you do? You're not supposed to do that.
Yeah. So, but I mean, the base gameplay is that you have, of course, you're leveling up. You collect gems on the playfield as you kill monsters. They drop gems. You collect those gems. They give you experience, and you level up. And then, of course, you can also collect coins, which you use to unlock permanent powers. So you have a set of permanent unlocks that make you stronger, give you higher damage, give you the ability to absorb more damage, makes your character... move faster, you can duplicate your projectiles, make your projectiles move faster. All of these various permanent unlocks that you can also turn off if you want an extra challenge. But that's one of the things in the game where when I first started to play it for the first time, I was just thinking, why is my my character so weak no matter what weapons I get? And it's because you haven't unlocked all of these permanent unlocks. So you get to the point where you have enough of your permanent unlocks unlocked to where your character has a pretty good chance to survive most early game stuff. You're not constantly dying just because you happen to run through a small group of enemies. But then you also, over time, slowly figure out what the best combos of weapons are. Usually early on, when you first start fresh with the game, I would recommend really going defensive and using pretty much anything that will keep enemies away from you. Like garlic, for example, which puts a shield around you, or anything that can, spin around you.
Like the Bible, basically.
Bible is a good one. Yeah. So that's really good. Those are those are the ones I'm leaning on in the Switch version right now because I'm just starting out. The character that I lean on early too is the woman. I think she's the third character over at the top. Like you start off with one character unlocked where you start off with the whip as a weapon, and then there's 3 more characters. And I'm not too sure what the exact character count is, but it's somewhere around 20, I would think. And so the third character that you unlock is a woman that uses a rune tracer, which is a laser that kind of bounces around the screen, and that's really, really powerful. So she's pretty much what I lean on at first, because once you power that weapon up all the way, and what you do is you get a weapon, and then there's another usually a defensive item that you can pick up, that if you level them both up all the way, then you evolve the offensive weapon into something even more powerful. So your goal is to sort of get these 6 offensive weapons and then get the kind of defensive / buff items that correspond in order to make those weapons evolve. Right. So you're usually, for example, a build that I would usually have is, maybe garlic early on. The axe is really good. I usually get I think it's the clock lancet, which freezes enemies. What else? Usually, sometimes I'll get the whip, sometimes the fire wand. Enemies, the cross is actually really good too because it pushes enemies away as it fires. So there, you kind of arrive at maybe like a group of like maybe 6 to 8 weapons that you kind of crutch out on, where you just know that if you can get to the point where you can combine these and then evolve them, you can pretty much sit there and just watch these waves of enemies come towards your character, and they just die on the perimeter. And they're, it almost gets to the point where if you have a good enough set of weapons that you just walk away. You can almost walk away and make a sandwich, especially with some of the characters where a lot of the characters have built-in strengths to begin with. Like some characters are really fast. There's one character, he's kind of a demon with wings, and he's incredibly fast, and he's really, really good to use because you have the built-in speed, so you don't have to pick up an item that gives you speed, like the wings item gives you speed. You can ignore that, and so you kind of get into that meta game that you were talking about, Guillaume, a little bit, where you start to say, like, well, I don't need the garlic because I can use something else to kind of take the place of it, and that way, instead of going defensive, I can, juice a little bit more offense, and that helps you in the end game, because the end game gets really, really hairy, where you have constant waves of enemies to the point where the entire screen is just filled with enemies, and you're just sitting there buzz-sawing through them. Or like pushing them back, and you fire a fire wand into a group of enemies and it just carves a huge hole right through the enemies. So it gets pretty cool and quite addictive. And on the Switch it plays great. I'm curious to see, one thing I haven't done because I just started playing it today. I didn't have a chance to play it last night. I'm wondering, because on the Steam Deck it slows down a little bit when you get a lot of enemies on the screen. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if it does that on the Switch. I'm curious. I don't expect it to, but I'm curious to see how it really behaves when things get really, really hairy. But I just haven't. My character isn't strong enough to go that deep into the game. I think I've only survived for maybe, I'd probably not even 15 minutes at this point. I've only unlocked 4 of the characters.
Right.
So I have quite a ways to go, but it's a really good game. I would recommend it to anybody that has a Switch. It'll be something great to play on the go because it's incredibly simple. All you have to do is just move your character around. You don't have to do anything else. And
you kind of have to pay attention to the weapon and item combos but that's the thing about this game. Like you do have to. The game starts out kind of very slow, and you really don't have access to all the items that you need to get very far. But as you play, the way that it worked on the when I played on an Xbox, like there were a ton of achievements, but those achievements were tied also to unlocking certain items or certain effects or certain options in the menus, and so or unlocking a character. So like until you have spent, I don't know, you've managed to survive 5 minutes in this stage or 10 minutes in that stage or killed this many enemies in one, at once. You just don't have access to certain things that will allow you to kind of unlock like super powerful combos. So you have to give this game a little bit of time. But once you've unlocked enough stuff, like you do have like in-game hints where basically like if you've managed to stumble upon a particularly like the good combination of weapon and item, then like it kind of underlines it for you. Like, yes, the garlic plus this item equals ? And then like that's how you know, like, okay, I need to pursue this. Whenever I do choose garlic as a weapon, I need to choose that item, and then maybe something will happen. Yeah. And you also get further ways to kind of tweak what you're given, because what happens is when you level up, you get a choice. You can choose usually three. You get to choose from 3 items that are semi-randomly chosen. Typically, there'll be a couple in there that will be the counterpart item that you need to evolve what you already have. Usually that's the way it works. You may not know that at the time when you see them, but after you play the game for a while, it's like, okay, well, for the cross, if I have the cross, in order to evolve that to its most deadly form, I need the clover, for example. So if you get the cross, if you select it, because you can choose one of the 3, if you choose the cross, that means that eventually you'll see clover come up, and then you'll choose that and then try to level that up as well, and eventually the cross will change into its final form. And also you unlock the ability later on to re-roll what you get. So there's definitely times when you will get 3 items. Like once you know what you want, you'll get 3 items and you'll say, I don't really want any of these, because unless you're trying to do something like, for example, there's an achievement where if you evolve all 6 of your weapons, you get an achievement. Unless you're trying to do something specific like that. Like there's some weapons where I really don't like them, like the pentagram, for instance. It seems powerful when you first get it because it destroys everything on the screen. But that doesn't happen very often, and it also wipes out all of the gems that are on the screen. So it actually kind of sucks. Yeah, so, but then you upgrade it all the way, and then there's an item that allows you to like fit 10% of the time. It's not going to wipe out the gems, or and then like you can increase that 20% of the time to like probably 50% of the time. Yeah. And so it becomes much better because it also like it triggers so much more frequently the more you upgrade it. Yep.
So and you can open up a grimoire, so you can see like what the evolutions are for each weapon, and it also there's a bestiary, so you can see all of the different monsters in the game, and it's really cool. It's a very, very good game, and the expansions are really cheap. The levels they're okay. Like they're nothing. They obviously they differ. They have different themes. Like this one is a forest. This one is a factory sort of thing.
But basically, like you can head in any one direction, and it's always going to repeat or something.
Right? And you can eventually unlock a map, so you can see where everything is, and And you can choose whether or not you want to be shown where items are, because not only do you get items in the random rolls when you level up, but you can also find different items on the map that actually, you start off with, I think, 12, you can collect 12, you have 12 item slots, right? So you get 6 weapons and then sort of 6 buff weapons that you need to evolve. But then you can also find other weapons and buff items on the maps themselves, and those are extra, so they'll occupy a 13th or a 14th slot. So, yeah, and there's like plenty of things to collect. You can find, new characters, like you can pick up coffins in some of the levels, and that unlocks new characters, and it's really cool. It's a really good casual game. I say it's casual, but at the same time, it's not a game that you can just play in the background. You really have to pay attention to what you're doing. So,
well, at the beginning, at least, it's really very. In the beginning, like you're trying actively to avoid the enemies. Like I've seen it described as a reverse bullet hell. But like people usually like they say that and then they don't explain what it means, or they explain it poorly. The way that I understand it is that it's a reverse bullet hell because you are the bullet hell eventually. Like if you can upgrade your weapons enough, and the enemies are kind of just like throngs of enemy, just always drawn to you, and so like you're trying to find the optimal combination of things that shoot out of you to destroy them, to destroy the crowds. I don't know where I was going with this.
Yeah. No. No, but it's
like at first, like you are trying to survive the vampires, so to speak. But if you manage to find all the right combinations of weapons and to become powerful enough, eventually, like there are these throngs of enemies all over the screen, but also like you're assaulted by like all the sounds of the stuff that you're shooting out, and like the colors start flashing, like it's starting like there's like rainbow effects just covering the screen, and you're like, what the hell? Where does this come from? Like they try to overload your senses because like so much is happening, so much is shooting out of you, but there are so many enemies, and as you said, like you could go and make a sandwich as you see that play out, like when you find the right balance of like, well, the enemies are tough, but my weapons are killing them all very quickly, very efficiently. They can't reach my guy, Yeah,
it's almost like it's very satisfying to sort of see, like this is the destruction that my creation has wrought, sort of thing. And you're just sitting there and watching all of this stuff. When you've completely powered everything up and you're just sitting there and just destroying everything around you, and you have the fire bomb, which is the Santa water. And, it's just literally exploding like fireworks all over the screen. And your fire wand, you send out the fire wand blast, and it just carves a huge, like, kind of triangular, path right through a bunch of enemies. And then your cross goes out, and it's pretty cool. It's really, really good. Like a lot of times, like once you kind of get up to speed with it, you sit down and I mean, you're pretty much playing through it for, like half an hour. You can sit there, but it's extremely fun. It's never boring because you're always kind of trying to pick up the next thing or, find something else, or you see some enemies. You go from actually trying to go towards enemies and find enemies because there's not enough for you to generate gems to level up, to having a screen completely filled with enemies, and you are this little island in the middle. And usually that's why I use the clock lancet every time, is because the clock lancet gives you an escape route when there absolutely is no escape route, because it freezes the enemies, and when the enemies are frozen, they can't hurt you. So you can actually use the clock lancet to give yourself a corridor to run through and get out. And sometimes, it can get really, really hectic, but it's a really fun game. So I'd recommend it for anybody. It's really cheap. And like I said, it'll be great to play it on the go. Perfect game to play on the airplane, kill a half hour or so, stuff like that. So it's really, really good.
Yeah, I agree. I might pick it up. I haven't played the expansions yet, so I'm it's a fun game to play, and like lots of humor and Also, of course, like it draws a lot of inspiration, quote unquote, from Castlevania. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if some of the sprites are basically taken from Castlevania.
Yeah, they definitely look like it.
Yeah,
for sure.
But yeah, no, it's fun. It's cool. All right. Well, so as for what I've been playing, what have I been playing? I've been playing Pikmin 2, but I figured that people are probably maybe getting a little bit tired of hearing me talk about playing Pikmin games. But I
never get tired of it, Guillaume. Never get tired of it.
Well, that's reassuring. But I will very quickly say, I finished Pikmin 1 HD, and I came away from it thinking less of the game. Like, it was more annoying. Like, I guess I underestimated just how much playability the Wii pointer was adding to that game. When it came out as the Wii pointer control, the new play control version on the Wii. I really missed that in this time around. And yeah, like the combat with the Pikmin was kind of just very frustrating, you know. It's very hard to aim directly on the enemies. And yeah, like I just I wasn't having that much fun with having to pamper my little Pikmin, making sure that they can get around this or that obstacle, because they're always kind of going in the straight line towards you. So if you go around the corner, they just try to get through that corner, but then like there are very few actual corners in Pikmin. You know, everything is like roots and plants and stuff like that. So they will get trapped behind kind of a curvy thing, a curvy root. And so, like, you're going to lose them if you don't pay attention to them. And that's not super fun. But I finished that, and then I started playing Pikmin 2, and they really, really, really improved the pathfinding, at least for the Pikmin who are following you. Like, they will actually get around obstacles by themselves without you having to use the C stick or the right stick to manually move them around a route or something. So that changes things a lot. And the combat is also noticeably easier and simpler. It's easier to actually, the Bulborgs, or is that what they're called? The small round enemies, like basically the first ones that you find. You can very easily and quickly dispatch them by sending Pikmin directly on top of them, for extra damage. You're not hitting the enemy crab on the belly for extra damage. It's the back of a Bulborb or whatever.
Yeah, a lot of it, because like in Pikmin 4 and 3, even sort of the smallest ones, even if you haven't got like a purple Pikmin or like an ice Pikmin or something, like if you just nail them on top, it's one Pikmin pretty much kills it instantly.
Right. And in those games, you have on the Switch, you have the lock-on, which makes it extra easy.
It's not that hard to do, yeah, exactly. Yeah. But that is something that you kind of, when that would happen in, Pikmin 4, every now and again I would remember, like, yeah, it wasn't always like this, was it? Like,
no.
It was a lot more time of even little enemies being bothersome because like they wouldn't die instantly, and then there'd be a few Pikmin at their feet and they'd have the chance to bite at them, and that you could lose them even to the lowliest kind of enemies.
Yeah, I just there's a lot of combat in Pikmin 1, and it's very annoying because I never really figured out the timing for when to call back my Pikmin to me and then when to send them to attack those frog things, which have a name. I just can't remember it yet.
I know the ones that kind of jump up in the air quite high and then come down really hard. Yeah, I remember. Oh, definitely a lot of bad memories of those when I played Pikmin 1 on GameCube.
Yeah, it's just very fiddly, like in Pikmin 4 you can just like, okay, gang, just rush this frog, and then they do, and it's usually over very quickly. But in Pikmin 1, it's like, okay, like throw them one by one on its back, and they keep hitting it, but then like the frog jumps in the air, it's going to land on some Pikmin below it. Like there's a lot going on, but it's very kind of fiddly. Like you have to micromanage everything. Like, okay, the frog's about to jump, it's going to throw my Pikmin on their back if they're around the frog, so I need to call them back now. Okay, I missed. The frog jumped, now it's like suspended in midair, and lots of my Pikmin are just motionless right under it. And okay, now they're dead because the frog landed on top of it. But then, like, yeah, like so you have to throw your Pikmin directly on its back, but then like they don't do enough damage. They don't stun it. They don't, really slow its rate of jumping up and then attacking. And so it takes forever to take them down. And that's kind of every enemy in Pikmin 1. In Pikmin 2 already, like they kind of moved away from that a little bit. But yeah, so it's just more fun to play because of that. Because you don't have to keep an eye on your Pikmin at all times when you're going around corners, and because the combat is a lot more forgiving in most instances. One thing that's changed is that like the focus now is not on like the finding all your ship parts in a certain amount of certain amount of days. Now you've got all the time in the world. You're looking for treasure to pay off your company's debt, and things open up very slowly and methodically. Like you have to find specific treasures to unlock new areas on the planet, new levels. But to do that, like like you have to go find the white Pikmin and the purple Pikmin, and then okay, now you can take down this barrier. You can go get this item that will lead you to the next area, and maybe that's where you're going to find the blue Pikmin or the yellow Pikmin. I swear, I must have been playing for 3 hours, and well, maybe less than that. But like, I still had only the red Pikmin. Like those were the only main Pikmin that I could get. It took forever to unlock the yellow Pikmin, which you then need to unlock the blue Pikmin. I got the purple and the white ones in the caves, but then you can't spontaneously produce them. You have to go convert your red Pikmin in caves, in the flowers in the caves to get them. So like they're not units that you take to the field lightly, because you don't want to lose them, because you can't easily produce more. Anyway, I'm kind of rambling, but like it's funny how I think that a few years ago I played the new Play Control Pikmin 2, and I was enjoying it enough, and then when it came to the post-credit content, I kind of jumped off because it was too much. The underground, the caves were getting too long, and they were a little bit boring, and I was like, you know what, I'm good. I don't need to keep playing this. But the initial first impression of Pikmin 2 is really good. Like this is fun. This is less fiddly. This is definitely an improvement over the first game. And I don't think I felt that when I compared New Play Control Pikmin 1 and New Play Control Pikmin 2. But on the Switch, it's a different beast. In addition to Pikmin, which I feel like I've talked about too much already, I've been playing Quake II. And so this came out on the Switch. Like this, I guess there was a Bethesda event. I think it's QuakeCon, right? Anyway, so like every year they've been releasing some game. Yep. Okay.
Yep.
So they've been releasing some game. I had been wondering, where's Quake 2? They've released Doom 2, like, Doom 64, like that was a big thing. That was last year, right? And so, and Quake was on the Switch and the Xbox, and I was like, where's Quake 2? I feel like we haven't seen that game in forever. And so this year was the year for that. And I don't have especially fond memories of playing Quake 2. Like, in fact, like I never owned it personally. And I guess technically my friends never owned it either because what they had was a pirated copy. But I did watch them play some of Quake II back in the day. I don't think it was like anyone's favorite game, but we were not playing the multiplayer. We were not having LAN parties or anything like that. We were playing the single player, the solo campaign, which has never been the actual strength, I think, of the Quake series. And in fact, with Quake 3, they gave up entirely on campaigns. And they were like, you know what? This is Quake 3 Arena. This is just, a frag fest, just multiplayer all the time. That's all you're doing. But Quake 2, it's a strange game. So first, I think that maybe it was last week I mentioned that I wasn't sure about playing this on the Xbox because the controller doesn't have motion controls. And I find that the motion controls, when they're implemented well, really help refine dual stick first-person shooter controls on consoles. I'd rather play with a mouse and keyboard, but in the absence of that option, I'll take some, motion-enhanced aiming. What I found with Quake 2 is that it doesn't really need it because at least playing on easy, which is what I'm doing, the hitboxes are wide enough that you don't need to be, especially to have great aim to be shooting at the enemies to do damage. So, there is kind of localized damage that you can do, but this is not a game about headshots, even though you can do them, and sometimes you will make enemies lose their head, and the enemies will keep shooting at you anyway, so you have to keep killing them anyway. So the headshots are not a thing that you're pursuing in Quake 2. But yeah, I found that the enemies' hitboxes were forgiving enough that it doesn't matter if your aim is that precise. So it's playing pretty well on Xbox. I'm sure I would still enjoy having motion controls like playing in the Switch, but right now, the Xbox is good enough. And yeah, Quake 2, so I did a little bit of reading after, preparing to talk about it, and I read stuff that I don't think I knew back in the day when it came out, but that makes a lot of sense, such as Quake 2, Quake 1 was the last game that John Romero worked on at id Software before leaving, and Quake 2 he didn't work on, and it was originally not meant to be Quake 2. So this is a game that they were making, and then they were like, you know what, let's just call this Quake 2, and people will buy it. And there's kind of a hint of that in the fact that the setting is completely different. The style of the environments is completely different. And in Quake 2, you're fighting the Strogg. You're like a space marine. You're sent to their planet to try to take the battle back to their home world or something. Your whole ship full of other space marines gets shot at. As you're making entry into the atmosphere, you deviate from your trajectory, which is the reason why you don't get killed or captured immediately. So you have to make your way to your team or whatever. But this is a game where you don't see your team very much, at least not at the beginning. And so this has nothing to do with Quake 1, which was more had this gothic kind of feel, you were fighting more like enemies, whereas the Stroggs are basically cyborg aliens. The two games it just shows this is Quake 2 in name only. And something that is weird, looking back at it now, back then it seemed to be a pretty big deal to me. Like, I know that magazines were hyped for it. I know that friends were talking about it.
In the PC world, it was huge.
Right.
It was because of that multiplayer component. I mean, I'm sure. I mean, there's a large segment of people out there who would probably say, "Oh my God, Quake II! It's like the best game of all time."
Right.
You know, because of their experiences playing with the multiplayer.
Right. And when you only play the single player campaign, I don't think you really get that, right? So it was a good game at the time. My friends enjoyed it, but I don't remember anyone being that blown away outside of the fact that, oh shit, like, you know, they just got a new 3D FX card, like one of the early 3D acceleration cards that came out back then, and like that was top of the line basically back then on a Pentium. And so the game looked good, but it kind of got forgotten at some point, I think. And I looked up, I typed in Google like top 100 PC game lists, because that's a thing that some gaming outlets will do periodically, and PC gamers, and I think that they had the first Quake somewhere in there at number 40, but not Quake II. You know, like, this is not a game that lasted through the ages that people think like, yeah, this is one of the best games of all time, even though it was kind of treated that way back when it was released. Like the Quake II did make top, like, it was in 9th position in the top 100 of some magazine, in like Next Gen Gamer or something. Like when the top 100 list released in that magazine, basically like 2 or 3 months after Quake 2 came out. So, you know, like the effect was strong initially, like, oh shit, this is one of the greatest games that I've ever played. But then, like, today it's like, Quake 2, like, who cares? So it's just interesting. Like, but it's still, even though I wasn't crazy about it back then, I didn't have a computer that could run it. Once I did get a computer that could run it well, I was playing other stuff on it. But it's still, going back to it, it's still a fun experience, still kind of nostalgic. In 1997, I was probably playing Dark Forces 2 Jedi Knight. You know, that's the stuff that I was excited for. Quake 2, not so much.
Yeah, and Doom was more like that, where it's like Doom felt like, not that Doom was story heavy at all, but it felt like they were kind of trying to at least build some sort of mythology to it. Whereas Quake always felt to me like, okay, well, this is really a multiplayer demo, and we're going to try to slap a story onto it, but we don't really care about it too much. Like, I mean, there's nothing in Quake that I feel like they could even turn into something like Doom Eternal, for example. I just don't think there's anything there. Granted, I haven't really, I played like a tiny little bit of this when it came out last week or whatever. But I don't know. Like, how much of a story is there in the single player? Like, is it super generic?
Well, I mean, there's like that iconic enemy, the Strogg.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned them,
Strogue?
right?
Is it Strogue?
Strogue? I don't know. STROGG.
Yeah, because I think at the start they say, yeah, because I was expecting them to just say, oh yeah, you go to the homeworld of the Strogg, and I'm pretty sure they say Strogue. I was like, really?
Okay.
It's like,
sure.
Okay, way to church up your entirely cheeseball name for an enemy.
Sure. Yeah, like, I don't know. Like, Quake 1, I don't know what the story is. Like, it's got a lot of, like, Cthulhu or, like, Lovecraftian kind of creature design or stuff like that. At least that's what I read up in Wikipedia, but I don't really remember it. Mostly, to me, Quake 1 was the nail gun and, you know, 9-inch nails. And, you know, you could find 9-inch nail boxes around as ammo for your nail gun. And also, every time that you would see a switch, you would have to go press it, and invariably there was like some bullshit trap that would be sprung on you. And always, even though I knew it would happen every single time, it always scared the fuck out of me. And I just, like, okay, there's like this big room that I have to enter. There's only one entrance, one exit. I have to go to the end of it to press this button. Yeah, of course, like a giant, Acme, like, anvil just fell on me. Like the whole ceiling is starting to collapse on me, or, to come down, and like, yeah, it's squishing me. It's killing me very quickly. Great. Like lots of traps, and it was kind of annoying. And always, like, it was a game about jump scares, basically. Quake II ditches that, thankfully. Not as much jump scares or stuff that although, like, whenever you do open a door or you do, kind of flip a switch somewhere, of course, like, there's some hidden closet somewhere that an enemy was waiting in. Like, now you've just freed it, and now,
Yep.
There was no enemy. Like, you had cleared the room. Now there are more enemies that just came out. You have to, and they might, scare you. They scare me, but yeah. So anyway, so there's still that kind of stuff.
By the end of the game, that stuff gets really old and predictable. Like, that's how it was. Like, Doom 3 was like that, where it's like, okay, I guess this entire game is just one big monster closet where I go over here and flip a switch, and all of a sudden a wall opens right behind me and a monster comes out. Oh, it's so scary. Like, by the end of the game, it's not scary anymore. It's just annoying and predictable, and it's just like, okay, all right, can we move on?
Yeah. But yeah, so there's that. Quake 2 is trying to do something a little bit more directed and cohesive, in that the levels they are discrete. Like, it's not an open world. There is loading between areas, but you can move freely from one area to the next and then come back. And you might have to do that for certain objectives. Like, you go into the armory, you go do the thing that you need to go do in the armory, and then you come out of it, and then you go back to the supply room that was across the hall, and now you enter that level, and you go do your thing there. Like, there's not a hub world. It's more like, it's all interconnected, but it's, discrete levels. And you are following loosely kind of a set of, like, primary and secondary objectives. Like, go to the communications room and go do your thing there. Usually flip a switch. So, like, they're trying to not so much tell a story as to give you an experience that's a little bit more coherent. But it's nothing on the level of what GoldenEye would do, where you have to actually, like, set up a bomb next to, like, to blow up this computer or whatever.
Yep.
Like, it's much more limited.
Not that GoldenEye really explains that very well, mind you.
Yeah, but I mean, like, they really tried, though. Like, and I feel like, Quake 2 was far less advanced than that. So
yeah, I don't know. It's kind of a different. It's really different because that's actually trying to kind of fit into the super spy sort of kind of thing. Whereas Quake, really, it's like, that's like basically made by a bunch of tech bros,
Right, and the basically the gameplay is like, the progression is you try to find bigger and bigger guns to take out the enemies, and that's about it. But it is fun, and the game is very fast. Apparently, it's less fast than the first Quake, but I wouldn't be able to tell you that at all from playing it. Like, it's very fast. It feels great with the controller, which is something I did not expect, and I'm enjoying it. Even though I would prefer that some company somewhere would port Jedi Knight, the first one, Dark Forces 2, Jedi Knight. And I wish I would be able to play that comfortably on a console. That would really be like a nostalgic and fun experience for me. But in the meantime, like, this will have to do. One thing that I found funny is that the cracked version that my friend was playing, of course, had taken out the pre-rendered cutscenes, because they were taking up too much space, right? To be able to easily kind of copy. And I guess we still had floppy disks back then, or maybe like we were like burning CDs. I can't remember. But like this was a big game, so to make it more easily shareable, they would take out the cutscene. So for the first time, I've seen the kind of the opening cutscene, and it is so 1997. You know,
Yeah,
it is so like
it's like N64 level cutscenes.
yeah, kind of like it looks good. It's well done, but it's like, okay, this is the scene where your ship is getting, you know, shot at from the planet. And okay, so the not the escape pods, but the orbital entry pods, I suppose, are shooting out towards the planet. But then like there's some like computer explaining your mission to you or whatever, and of course there's like a wireframe little marine just like spinning in the corner, you know, for no fucking good reason whatsoever, other than like it's a computer, you know. Why wouldn't you have a wireframe marine just spinning in a corner? Like that's what computer displays are for. At least that's what they were for in 1997 in like in futuristic worlds and stuff like that. Anyway, like it's so it's very corny, it's very but it's it's nostalgic. It's how games were back then. So I'm enjoying it. I don't know if I would recommend anyone to go run and get Quake 2, but it is
on Game Pass, yeah.
It is on Game Pass. I think it's just $10 on Switch. So it's not, you know, like if you want to go for it, go for it. Like if you were there back then, you have nostalgic feelings for Quake 2. Yeah, sure, go for it. But if you are expecting kind of an important piece of history that like, oh, so Quake 2, like, okay, now I understand why all this game and that game, like why they all followed this template clearly, you know, like because Quake 2 was such this important game that clearly influenced a ton of stuff. Like, well, actually not really, you know, it kind of got lost to obscurity. Like other better games came out afterwards, were more influential, and the whatever legacy that Quake has is, you know, there's not much of one. I was kind of surprised actually, looking up on Wikipedia the series, that there was a Quake 4. I had no fucking idea. I completely forgot about that, but it was made by Raven Software. Okay. Which now, of course, is, you know, has been absorbed into the Activision Call of Duty game mill. But yeah, like they made Quake 4. And you were asking about the story. They tried to continue the story of Quake 2 and Quake 4. And again, it's something about the strokes. And it's like, I don't, you know, who gives a shit? What? Yeah.
It's, yeah. Again, those iconic enemies. Yeah, but Lord. Quake, you're absolutely right, though. Quake occupies this weird... It occupies this very strange space where it's almost like id Software sort of made Quake because they didn't know what else to do with themselves. It's like, well, we have to have something that pushes the limits of graphics, you know, tech. So we've done Doom to death. Like by that time, people were pretty sick of Doom. I mean, because not only was it just like Doom 1 and Doom 2, but you had all of these different mods, and you had Final Doom, and all of just like those things that whole thing, everybody was just so over it that they knew they had to do something completely new. Mm-hmm. But games, I think at that point, by that, people were expecting more by the time Quake came out, you know?
Yeah.
More than just here is a tech demo with a little bit of story wrapped around it, but who really cares? Go out and blast monsters.
Right, and I think that maybe if Quake 2 had a legacy, is that the engine was probably very good and got used by lots of games from that era, you know?
Yeah.
But I couldn't name you what those games are, but yeah. So it's more, like the technology behind Quake 2 probably more influential than the game itself.
Yeah, I would agree.
All right, so that's it for new business. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to do some listener mail. Stay tuned. welcome back. We are going to do some listener mail. If you want to have your email read on the show, write a good email. Or write a bad email. Write the kind of email that James will pick usually to read on the show. But tonight, James is not here. So we're going to read the good emails.
Yeah. I would say the same thing, Guy, it's we don't have to sit here and cater to James's fetish for stupidity.
Because I feel like some listeners, very astute, realize that there are some types of emails that will get read on the show.
Yeah, you could absolutely bait James into reading an email. Absolutely.
Like they're the SEO traps of the RFN inbox, basically. But so write to rfn@nintendoworldreport.com, and your email will be read if you correctly deduce the kind of stuff you need to put in there to make them be read. Anyway, so Greg, why don't you read the first email?
Yes, so Naaman writes, I'm currently walking around my park hearing James plea for emails to let you know that yes, people are in fact listening to the show. So here's a related question, mainly because I'm lacking imagination at this current point in time. I'd like to know what games you just like walking around in. As someone who has fallen in love with the Like a Dragon / Yakuza series in recent years, I'll often find myself just walking around in those games without any purpose other than to feel the senses and sounds of a city. Do you ever find yourself doing this? And if so, which games and why? Keep up the amazing work. I've been listening for over 13 years. I'm not about to stop anytime soon.
It's do you guys have an example? Because I think I need to think about it beyond.
I think the biggest game. I don't know about walking around. It probably wasn't, although it involved a little bit of walking. But the biggest game in terms of I must have spent by far the most time just like not actually doing anything, consequential or like working towards a goal in was Super Mario 64. Because it was this, revolutionary thing at the time of just like, okay, I've got this new kind of controller, new kind of controls, you can, like kind of, obviously it didn't have a run button the way that Super Mario Brothers games did. It was how much you push the analog stick, in a particular direction. So you could walk, if you wanted to, and it did try and encourage you to do it in these like very narrow sort of parts of the game. Literally, that you would have a narrow platform to walk over, or of course you'd have the sleeping piranha plant, and the idea was that if you kind of crept past it, it wouldn't wake up and all that. So it was kind of built into the game in these little areas of like, oh look, you've got this sort of much greater degree of control over how Mario moves now. And we want to show that off in things that do, actually have a point in the game, particular stars or just particular bits of the environment, how you get around them. But for me, the bigger thing was, cost a lot of money to import an N64 in the summer of 1996, several months before it would come out in Europe, in kind of March 97, I believe it was. And so Mario 64 was the only game I had for quite a long time, especially as it was a pain. At that point, it was a pain in the arse to sort of get the Super Nintendo back out and plug it in and play that, because it like the TVs that could play an NTSC signal at that point, most of them only had one input that could do that and stuff. So a lot of the time it was just like, no, I've done everything in this game. I'm just kind of playing it again, or I'm just messing around in this this playground. And it was very much a playground kind of game. Just the very beginning, outside of Peach's castle, any of the levels really to some extent, apart from maybe some of the later sort of where they tried to, worlds where they tried to be a bit more obstacle course-ish, like the TikTok clock and the Rainbow Cruise or whatever it was called. It definitely kind of, those were a bit less so, but most of them were kind of playgrounds. You just go in there, running around, messing around, just really kind of trying to perfect like my command over this new way of controlling the video game character and this new kind of game, and I still got quite a lot out of that because it was just, it was so revolutionary at the time and such a big step. So like that, I can't think of anything quite that way. So it's like a little bit with some areas in, say, Ocarina of Time, a little bit of a similar thing in terms of, just kind of messing around in Hyrule Field, or, just kind of walking around the various environments in that game. But yeah, I can't think of more recent examples quite the same way. I mean, I guess, the newest Zelda games, Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, I mean, to some extent, it kind of is the game, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like just being in that world, but there is always something that whether it's, you spot like a Korok or, you just investigating something that seems kind of like a point of interest you've not kind of dealt with before, or various things, so it wouldn't go quite to the level of, no, I'm just going to mill about somewhere.
Mm-hmm. I would say for me, Metroid Prime would be one where, there's like a kind of a tourism element to that game, especially as you gain the ability to go different places, with the morph ball and stuff like that. Like that's one of those games where I will just say, okay, well, I have the screw attack now and I can just fly through the air wherever I can go. Let's just see where I can go. Other games like that, Destiny 2 is like that, where it's similar to Metroid Prime, where you can see, the people I've played with, some of them would just try to see if they could get out of the environment, and they could do it quite a bit. Just trying to see, like, what if you just try to kind of test the boundaries of the game and see, have they tested if there's proper collision detection if I walk into this wall or if I drop into this hole and then go this way. And there's quite a number of times where those games are so large where, you'll drop out of the world entirely. A game like Skyrim as well is great for kind of virtual tourism, where there's so many just beautiful sort of places where you can walk up to and just observe the landscape. And of course, Grand Theft Auto 5 is the same thing, where a large component of the gameplay of that game is actually just walking around the world and seeing the dumb stuff that people say as you walk by them, or if you walk up to them or bump into them, they'll say something funny. So there's almost that kind of element of emergent gameplay in there, where there's always a surprise kind of waiting around every corner. But yeah, Metroid Prime and those Metroid Prime games, they definitely, and those games, like, they look so good that you just kind of want to, you want to try to travel everywhere in the environment, especially at the end of the game.
Yeah, I had a fair bit of like, I don't think it was ever like, oh no, I'm just going to wander the game, but like trying to 100% those games, you would end up doing that. Exactly. It may as well have been that, because like there's one pickup, I think the original Metroid Prime in particular, that was just like, oh god, even with the noise thing, because like you could do the thing where you switch the music off, and then you've got in the sound mix a pulsing noise that indicates the presence of a pickup. Even with that, I was like, where is it? Where is it? I couldn't find it. So you would end up kind of wandering those games. I guess like there was a little bit less of that with Prime 2, which is where they brought the screw attack in, but also when they did the light suit at the very end of the game, like basically that allowed you to warp around, like do a bit of fast travel. I can't remember how many fast travel points there were, but that was, kind of, and it was like right at the end of the game. It was basically, okay, you're ready to go to the last boss. Now you get this thing that lets you fast travel. So it was kind of a compromise, I feel like, where the original Metroid Prime obviously was very much kind of set up without and a lot of Metroid games have been, kind of set up, no, we don't need fast travel. It's all kind of, set up that it's about mastering how everything interconnects, and when you do, it shouldn't be that onerous to go anywhere from like a particular place. Like once you get how all the sort of shortcuts work, and so, and obviously you have the equipment that necessary to open them up or whatever might be required. But with 2, they did say like that. Here's fast travel right at the end. So if you're gonna go and hunt down some stuff, presumably maybe like the artifacts as well. I don't think you had to have done all the because they did that again in Prime 2, and but I think it was a little less kind of in some ways anyway. It was a little less kind of. Annoying by virtue of the fact that you did have some fast travel at your disposal at that point, but it did kind of mean less wandering around appreciating the environment, which I think was more of a thing in Prime 1 because it was more impressive at the time. Like, I mean, obviously, with remastered, the graphics are like quite a lot better, to say the least. When you go and watch the comparison videos, there is a little bit of, I was this impressed by that, when you see what it actually looked like. But I was really super duper impressed at that point. That was, I think, like as nice as stuff like Luigi's Mansion was, as a sort of very much a tech demo-y kind of game and stuff. Like, I think Metroid Prime was the first game I had for my GameCube, a bit over a year in, where it was like, oh, okay, this is what you can do with this thing. So I think I might not have done it like, overtly, explicitly, just to kind of admire it, but definitely mopping up those last items, I kind of essentially did that.
Mm-hmm. There's one bit in Metroid Prime where, I mean, like the Phendrana drifts kind of come to mind, but there's one bit in it's a little bit deserty, but also a little bit like the jungle. But basically, like finally, you get that big open sky over you. It's not raining or anything. There are birds just flying overhead, and I think that's like one of the wow moments where like the game, the room's a little bit more open than what you've been used to until that point in the game, and also when you realize, I can shoot the birds. You feel bad for a second, but also you're like, wow, cool.
A lot of that game at that time as well was just like try stuff to see like the graphical effect, like what graphical effects they'd thought of, like with the reflections and like killing bugs, and then the bug like juice like goes on your visor, and so you would try stuff like that because it was just like, oh wow, they've obviously they hadn't thought of everything, but they'd thought of a lot of stuff that people would try and actually have like an effect for that and stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, I do it a lot, of course, in virtually any Xenoblade game, just because of the sheer scope of those games and the verticality of those games, and how they always have you, okay, well, for this quest, go all the way up here and go to the top of this cliff, and then you're just in the process of completing that quest, you wind up looking over this massive like plain or something. So all those games are very good for that.
It's the thing is with Xenoblade, it's such a huge part of those games. It's just like you get these huge, especially like even the Wii game, especially for a Wii game, it just seemed like almost preposterous in scale at the time. And
the game wants you to explore it. It gives you experience points for exploring it.
Exactly.
And I don't know if it's counter to Naman's email, but I kind of need that. I think like I can't. I will rarely just like fire up a game just to putz around and like for it to do nothing else. Like usually I am looking to 100% it or to find something cool. I'm not just taking in the sights. Like I usually have another motive. So I think that the Xenoblade games are good at that. The new Zelda games are good at that. Just they make you curious about what's around the corner.
And that is like core to the experience. It isn't just like a kind of ancillary thing. Like something with when you've like exhausted everything else. It is very much at the core of what those games deliver. And for me, with certainly a lot of the main Xenoblade games, like there's just so much to explore that I've never actually like fully explored them. So there's less of a like, oh, let me just mill about in this area that I have explored before. It's much more because, like, no, I should be going and finding somewhere I haven't found yet. The only sort of bit of Xenoblade that I've ever really fully kind of explored is Future Redeemed, I should say, the Xenoblade 3 DLC that recently came out. That one, like, I've actually seen everything. So at that point, maybe you could just mill about in the places you've already seen. But with the other, like, the big mainline Xenoblade games, I mean, they're so big that, to me, that, like, there's always some other place, you know, where you haven't got the experience point bonuses for seeing everything yet or whatever. So it kind of harder to justify just chilling out when there's all that stuff out there.
Also, usually a giant ass enemy is gonna come around and prevent you from just chilling. So didn't often like have my party set up so they could actually like kill absolutely everything on the field, so that you could explore everywhere or feel relaxed about everything that was out there. Yeah. Well, I just finished replaying A Short Hike because it came out on Game Pass, but I played it on the Switch, and I played it before that on Steam, I think. So it will have been my third time playing through it. It's this short little game, but it's all about exploring an Ontario provincial park. Really nice sense of humor and personality and everything, and there's lots of little Animal Crossing-esque errands or challenges to do, or also like some, there's some Zelda in there, and that there's a lot of you've got a certain amount of stamina that you need to increase to be able to climb up the mountain, to be able to fly up. Anyway, so it's all about exploring the small little island, but eventually, like I do need those little kind of errands or whatever, like these little challenges, this kind of motivation to find every golden feather that I need to which is the stamina in this game, to be able to better fly up and then glide around and do fun stuff. But once I've exhausted that in that game, like, okay, time to call it a day. Like, I'm not going to fire up the same save file to keep looking at the same things on the same island. Like, maybe I'll wait a year or two and then go back to the game, but start fresh.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I think it's most effective. I think I do the most of this type of thing when it is kind of incorporated into gameplay. Or something like, I was thinking like something like No Man's Sky is another game where, I mean, the entire purpose of that game is you're in this procedurally generated universe where the whole goal of that game is effectively tourism. You go to this planet, you have no idea what it looks like, and so you're walking around taking in the sights. So I think if you like this kind of thing, or if you like walking around environments, No Man's Sky would be a pretty good, something to kick the tires on, because it's really the whole point. I mean, obviously there's a lot of other stuff. You have to build a base and do a lot of stuff like that. But it's pretty cool in the sense you're just walking around and you don't even know what's around the next corner. So.
Yeah, and Greg's mention of Super Mario 64 reminds me of an interview, I think it was with Miyamoto, who was saying that when they were making the game, they realized, like Super Mario Brothers, people were enjoying just the act of jumping and running was fun in itself. And after that, it lost its novelty. But now with the Super Mario 64, it's fun again to just, run around and jump around. And so I definitely felt that in Super Mario when playing Super Mario 64 originally. And also Super Mario Galaxy had a little bit of that, playing with the gravity on the planetoids. It was fun to just not really do anything, like just stay in that initial starting area and just toy around with the physics. So I guess maybe that's the closest I've come to Naman's just, taking in the sights thing, in that when I'm experiencing that in Super Mario 64 and Super Mario Galaxy, I'm probably not even going to leave the first area, or I'm not going to play the game through to completion. You know, like maybe I'll get my dose of just playing in that playground for a bit in the first area, and then that will be enough. And then I'll play something new. You know?
Yeah, that I think it just reminds me again, one other factor that probably might have, when in those days, like Mario 64 type of days, that might have led me to kind of just, other than, not having many other games to play, of course, lead me to kind of just chill out in a game would be for the music. Because it was in a time where you couldn't just go, oh, I like this song, let's look it up on YouTube and just like put it on in the background while I'm doing something else. Like, it was like, no. So like, yeah, Super Mario 64 is like the underwater music, the like that was really nice. So you could kind of just enjoy like swimming down, with the eel and then like coming up into the cave where the drum beat kicks in and all that, like just doing that, even though I've done it a million times, or just like, messing around in Kakariko Village because I always like that song. But of course, years later, I mean, first of all, some games had sound tests. Not that many Nintendo games necessarily had sound tests, but some games did. But yeah, once you get to today, like if you really like a song from a video game, it probably isn't going to be very long until you could just find it outside of that. But that definitely was a factor once upon a time.
And Lego City Undercover, I do enjoy a good open world game. I'm not sure if Lego City Undercover is that good of an open world game, but I did enjoy exploring it. Like there was always something fun to see. And since it's a Lego game and there's no real stakes, you might as well just be walking around and taking in the sights. Even if you get attacked, like it doesn't really matter. But yeah, it was fun to just see what was in there, and finding like the Lego store in the Lego City, and it's like, that's funny, that's cool. And thinking of Lego City Undercover reminded me that The Simpsons Hit and Run on the GameCube offered kind of a similar feeling of like this is just a fun area to explore, because of course you were like, for basically the first time, you were exploring in 3D in a weird pseudo platformer / racing game, the town of Springfield, and meeting the characters of The Simpsons, and that was fun to just visit, like forget about the missions, about what you were supposed to be doing, and just like, well, let's go see what Flanders is up to, or like let's go see like what it looks around Moe's bar, Anyway, John, could you read the second email?
All right. Jonathan writes, "Salutations, RFN. So there I was listening to episode 835 when all of a sudden James said something along the lines of, there's a Sesame Street parody of Twin Peaks and... Y'all ever have a moment where you literally hear brakes screeching in your head? Maybe it's followed up with the old dial-up internet noise from the 90s. A piece of information just hits your brain like a wrecking ball, blue screens it, forcing a complete reboot, fatal error. So that's how I immediately watched Twin Peaks, and now my world is whole again. You shattered my brain and rebuilt it anew in less than 10 minutes, so thank you. But now it just begs a question. Roll with me on this one. Everyone at RFN is replaced by Muppets except a single person. Who's the one human among you? Feel free to do this same premise, but for Nintendo games. Imagine Xenoblade Chronicles 1, but every single character is a Muppet, except Dunban. Metal Face Puppet, Muppet. Rain Time Muppet. Every Nopon, including Harapon, Ricky, Muppet. Maybe it's like that old E3 Direct where we literally see the characters becoming Muppets as Dunban watches in horror. As adorable as Arfin sounds, the real show mascot is Lon Jindaman. Radical Defect / Jonathan Higgins. Can't argue.
John, I know you're going to want this one back. It's, you know how to pronounce rhyme because it rhymes with time. Mm-hmm. Because it is always rhyme time.
Good God. How can I forget? How can I forget? It's been burned into my brain after hearing it so many times.
That's the thing. If we could picture what Lon Jinderman looks like, maybe it would have come up in the mascot conversation. But it's a very sort of nebulous concept in my mind.
Yeah, it's more of a lifestyle or a state of mind. You know, like that New York state of mind, the Lon Jinderman state of mind. You know, just think about it. Mistakes, I've made a few, but too few to mention, Greg.
Okay.
All right, Muppets. So, first off, who would be the human?
I don't know. I feel like it's situational. Like it depends on what movie
Whoever's
we're
the
in.
host, I guess. Yeah.
I think it would be Guy. I think Guy is the most sensible.
So I thought you were going to go all Shatner on me there. All the people ever. He was the most human. Yeah. The spot funeral.
No, I think it was actually. I would prefer it would be Guy because I feel like Guy would be the one who would take it the worst. He would be the one that would just be.
Because,
can you guys? We'd be like, can you guys just stop being Muppets for 2 seconds?
You think that when the other people become Muppets, they become extrematized versions of themselves? You know, it isn't just you're exactly the same. You're just a Muppet now. It's that you just get sort of you're a caricature of yourself at that point, even more of one, and that makes it difficult for the non-extrematized person to cope with.
Yeah.
Well, so like if they turn me into a Muppet, I think that physically it would be easy. Like I'm balding, but I still have hair around, like a crown of hair or something. So like that's a very popular Muppet design. I feel like I don't know the names of the Muppets, so I can't name them. But yeah, like I feel like I kind of know what I would look like as a Muppet.
Yeah.
But being a Muppet, like they would probably and. The Muppets are an American thing, right? So I feel like they would hear like, oh, French Canadian, and then like they would give the Muppet a bad French from France accent.
Absolutely.
And kind of mix up all the fucking cliches about the French,
For sure.
Yeah. So yeah, it's probably safer for me to remain the human, for sure. Like, I feel like they would absolutely get it wrong.
I'm sure if the Muppet version of me opened its mouth, it's basically going to be like Lisa looking at the big book of British smiles.
Oh, man. Yeah, they really do lean into stereotypes, for sure. They really do. Like, Guillaume, I'm sure you would have a beret. For sure. Because,
probably.
It's because why not? Yeah.
I was thinking that Greg, for some reason, I was thinking of the way that the Cookie Monster is in a garbage can. And is that, yeah.
Oscar the Grouch.
That's
You're
him,
thinking
right?
of Oscar
the Grouch.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So Oscar the Grouch in the garbage can, except Greg would be, I guess, in a Yoshi egg. But,
I just emerge out of it.
Yeah.
Well, would you, though? Or would you just remain in the egg?
No, I kind of
just...
like it's kind of cracked, so like you just sort of lift the lid open, of the top half of the egg, say something, and then very much the same way I might mute my headset. I just put the lid back on, retreat into the egg.
I feel like maybe we would just see like an eye peek out, maybe, but we never actually see the Yoshi. We'd never actually see Greg.
And if it was true to my Smash Brothers playing, once I've retreated into the egg, I would then roll off the stage by accident.
Exactly. Yeah,
and
I think
canned laughter would ensue.
Yeah, I think I would probably be like, how they have like Ernie in the bathtub. Rubber ducky, you're the one. Like, that would be me. That would be Tub Time, for sure. So they already have that template there. It would just be a slight alteration into a bald white Canadian. So, except Ernie he's not always in the tub. I would be in the tub exclusively, much like Greg would always be in the trash can. Or the Yoshi's egg.
Yes. Yeah, although it's also kind of like the trope in like sitcoms, wasn't it? Like Norm's wife or Maris's wife. Oh, sorry, Niles' wife Maris in Frasier. That you never see them. You could be. I don't know if they ever did that gag in the Muppets, but you could do it.
Yeah.
As for Nintendo games, I don't know. Is there anything particularly funny about Luigi being the only human, or I feel like maybe like for maximum chaos, like you would expect maybe the only responsible character to remain the quote unquote human, and all the rest like needs to be herded, or to be controlled because they're out of control Muppets. But like, what if Luigi was the only untouched character in Mario, and everyone else turned into I don't know, some weird gremlin?
Yeah, that's it. Well, it could be like they've touched on this with sort of Smash Brothers concepts at times, isn't it? Where some huge thing happens where like everybody gets turned into trophies, but one. It's Kirby usually, isn't it? Because Kirby is God, so he gets to survive. Which is, I mean, the thing is, how different would Kirby be as a Muppet? He wouldn't be, presumably, because he'd just be like Kirby's Epic Yarn or something. Like he'd still be Kirby. It wouldn't really change him very much. So I guess in that sense, it makes sense to leave him unchanged because he'd be the same. But yeah, that could, if they're ever aching for another story mode in Smash Brothers one day, that could be, instead of being turned into trophies, the Nintendo characters are, or everyone but Kirby is turned into a Muppet.
All right. Well, next email then.
Well, actually, let's just before we leave that. What about James?
Yeah. Well, like I said, I mean, James, I imagine James as the host imagines he essentially is in that scenario most weeks, that he's the sane one. And we're all,
Really?
I didn't say it was accurate. I said he probably imagines that to be the case.
Well, what we hear before recordings usually, and the listeners get a peek of that sometimes, but like James trains a lot. Made his own home gym and stuff like that. So if he was turned into a Muppet, there would be definitely like a series of gags where like he's always like lifting a weight, and then like he lets it go, but like it keeps going up and down in the air or something.
Yep. Yeah, like would he be the guy with like the headband? And the workout gear, always on a treadmill, and so you would try to talk to him, and he'd be like, "No, I just got to finish these reps, bro."
Sure, yeah, probably always out of breath.
Yep, exactly. I think it's I like it. I like it.
Also, I think my idea for a Nintendo game, and it's a bit loose as a Nintendo game, but I do like the idea of like it's been done already, but so why not do it one more time? Redo GoldenEye one more time, but the human is very low polygonal Pierce Brosnan, and then everything else is like exquisitely photorealistically rendered Muppets of Sean Bean and everybody else, Famke Janssen and everybody else. That I think would be very, very it's Bond movies are intrinsically absurd, so why not just really have fun with it?
Yeah, exactly. Like pretty much like drop that polygonal Pierce Brosnan into like a Sackboy game, or like
Yeah, I'm just imagining like the Muppets dying in those very sort of charming ways that they where they get shot and slowly crumple to the floor. Go, why me? Or whatever. I don't know. Some of them might be
exactly.
Some of them might be
why
perfect
me?
Dark.
Waka waka waka.
Some of them might be perfect dark because they kind of run together in my mind. I mean, you could probably do that as well. Except in that case, I insist that Carrington is the only person, and even Joanna is a Muppet in that case. But I mean, like fucking Elvis and all that shit. I mean, that's pretty much Muppet territory anyway.
Yeah, it really
to be
is.
honest. But I think Bond would be the best. Just poor Muppets getting like headshotted with the silenced pistol, or the karate chop to the Muppet. Just
Well, the problem, Greg, with Pierce Brosnan is that, like, when you said it, like, it sounded so likely that this was already a thing.
That it is already a thing?
He seems to be, like, it was inevitable that he would be in a Muppets episode at some point. So I looked it up, and like, he's definitely been the human around the Muppets.
Yeah.
And, he's wearing a tuxedo here. I don't have the sound, but... yeah, like it's it definitely works because it's happened before.
Yeah, but Bond's it's just too big a cultural icon. I mean, for God's sake, if they do fucking Twin Peaks, they did James Bond, didn't they? I think we could be safely aware. It's a little bit more commercial than fucking crazy David Lynch series.
All right, so I will read the next question. Brian writes, "Hey guys. Apologies if this topic has already been discussed, but with the Switch successor being rumored, do you think we are going to get one final version of the Switch? Something along the lines of a Game Boy Micro or the last version of the Wii with trimmed-down functionality? My guess is that there will be some version of the Switch that uses a foldable screen that has been seen with newer cell phones to make it a Switch Lite, but even more portable. I'm curious on your thoughts. Keep up the great work on the show, Brian."
Well, there you go. See, maybe the Nintendo Flip name that one of our listeners suggested, it could come true if there were such a device as is described in that letter.
Right, the Nintendo Lite Switch.
Yeah, I would think that if that was going to happen, wouldn't you think that you would already see, because those things they're going to have, they would need a special screen to have a flip,
sure. Yeah,
right?
I mean, I'm totally out of the loop on those sorts of devices and all that. So I don't know what's involved, but
yeah, I just think, because I mean, I know that those newest phones, they have like the kind of like the bendable OLED screens, right? And so I think you would have to. It would come out somewhere that Nintendo made a big order for those types of screens, because it would be very specific.
And it'd be different from what they've already been sourcing, I guess. And the thing is, usually, as you sort of mentioned somewhat in the question there, the history of these sorts of devices, a lot of the time it tends to be taking functionality away. Like that is, and I guess, to some extent, a strictly portable Switch is, although it already happened with Switch Lite, but you kind of feel like, if it is going to be something, that you can fold up and make it more portable before, that's kind of adding functionality and adding cost, which is usually not the model when this has happened in the past. For instance, the Wii with the trimmed down functionality, as is mentioned, that was, I think, getting rid of, was it just composite AV and getting rid of the Wi-Fi and stuff? It was stripping a few things out, maybe the GameCube ports as well. Just get some components out there. Game Boy Micro was a little bit different, I suppose. I mean, it did lose the ability to play GBC and the original Game Boy games, so it did lose something in that sort of journey to get the form factor really down. But that whole thing was really weird because, the Game Boy Advance life cycle wasn't supposed to end then. In some ways it was only really getting going, you know what I mean? And as I've mentioned before, like the idea that, Minish Cap as like the first proper original Zelda came out after the DS in America, it just shows you how sudden that was. And so, like, the Micro, if they'd known the way things were going to go, they probably wouldn't have even done the Micro, because, like I said, they ended up with, like, struggling to sell them. Like, even in Japan, they had too many, I think, because, like, the DS just blew the doors off and that's all anybody wanted. So that was a kind of really weird case. I mean, I guess I will say this. If the Switch is actually going to challenge, like, the record, like with the PS2 and the DS, what was it, like 150 million or so? Like, it probably would need to have one of these kind of, not necessarily a dedicated version of the system, but it would have to have one of those, like, afterlife successes that, like, because the PS2 kept selling, especially in certain parts of the world, like, well into PS3's life, and I think the Switch, if it's gonna, like, get there, which, is not like a particular goal. I don't think that's anything Nintendo's that fussed about. What they're fussed about is, having sustainable revenue that keeps growing rather than setting records or anything like that. But some way of it selling probably after the next Switch comes out would be helpful in that regard. But would it require a further kind of dedicated kind of hardware version, maybe, but it might just be the case that, I mean, who knows how hard this distinction is going to be from this generation to the next generation, I mean, in terms of, will there be backwards compatibility? How much more expensive will the new system be? Therefore, could the old system still be relatively attractive to certain customers for a while? Certainly, if you look at the most recent transition for Sony and Microsoft, obviously there were other factors in play with the pandemic and, the creating supply constraints and the high price, but, it was okay, PS5's out now, PS4 is over. The PS4, gets out for quite a while. So, at this point, if it isn't a particularly hard break, you might not even need to kind of, actively gin up sales of the older one with a new dedicated kind of low end market device, in the Switch family for it to have those kinds of sales, depending on, how it compares with the next, generation.
Yeah. And I mean, with the PS4, I mean, there's new PS4 games that are still coming out and you just play them on the PS5. So,
yep.
but it specifically says this is a PlayStation 4 game, but it's seamless between the two systems. So we're in kind of a weird spot now in the industry where there's no longer, like Greg said, there's no longer a break point between consoles. So I don't, if I was to predict, I think the next Switch will just be a Switch 2, where it can play every single game that the Switch plays. It's just going to be like the Xbox Series X to, if you look at that model, I feel like it's going to be the Series, the current Switch would be the Series S, and then the next one is going to be the Series X, where it's completely backwards compatible and interchangeable with the Switch, but it can also play all of these other games in an enhanced form. And some games are exclusive, some games aren't. I don't really think that at this point, there's already a precedent for that in the market, so I don't think that Nintendo is always usually obsessed with is what we're doing confusing people? Are we gonna, are customers not going to understand what we're doing? This is coming from the company that talked about the third pillar back in the day, which was complete BS.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, it's sometimes they show a certain sensitivity to that. But then other times they've really run afoul of it,
Yes, they have.
Wii U, 3DS, they didn't communicate seemingly adequately the extent to which, this is a new generation of thing and it is going to have exclusive games and it isn't just they're slightly better or they have an additional stereoscopic effect or, a tablet controller as an optional accessory or something, they failed to communicate what those things were. So they're always, on the other hand, they always have to, seemingly they've been self-conscious about this notion that, they need something that they could sell as being somehow genuinely novel in a way that what you've described, which is, much more where the industry has been going in terms of, no, let's not reinvent the wheel every generation. Let's have carryover with accounts and let's have it be, kind of, something that you play your old games and it, you feel like you kind of keeping your collection going and all this sort of stuff. I wonder about that, whether because, look at the Joy-Con, for instance, which I don't know really, how much that ended up being that central to the Switch's appeal. I don't know. It wasn't for me, but 130 million people have bought Switches. Maybe for some of them it was. I don't know. But it just feels like they always are not confident enough to just say, if this is just the thing, but it's got more power to bring it, somewhat more up to date with where the rest of the industry is, or at least stop losing ground, to where the rest of the industry is. And other than that, it's basically kind of the status quo. They've never seemed that comfortable trying that. They've always got to try and spin it some other way. That there's actually, this is a new way of playing. And like I said, the problem with that can be on the one hand, I guess maybe, you can reap the benefits of that with something like DS, with something like Wii, which actually, specifically in the case of Wii, was very much like a GameCube, but they managed to spin it that it was this entirely different thing because of the controller and the way they sold it and some of the games they made for it. But, you can reap the benefits of that. Or on the other hand, you can have Wii U 3DS where you just kind of confuse people and people think it's some sort of add-on or like a kind of optional thing, and that it's not, just going to be where you should be playing your Nintendo games from now on. So I still wonder about how they're going to handle this. I like what John says is really quite logical.
Yeah.
But
I just, for me, it's I just don't see the burning need to wholesale. I don't see the market desire from people to wholesale replace the Switch. In the past, it's always been, it's clear that, visually or whatever, that the Super Nintendo needs to be replaced, that the N64 needs to be replaced, that the GameCube needs to be replaced. With the Switch, I'm not seeing that, even though the PS5 is more powerful, the Series X is more powerful. People don't really, if you have a Switch, it's occupies its own lane. And you're not looking at the Switch and saying, that needs to be replaced so that it can match up with PS5 or match up with Xbox Series X, because it's a very different product from those, and I don't think people care.
Yeah, it feels like the need for the Switch successor is more pressing for developers than for users.
Yeah,
in a way.
Yeah,
the Nintendo's kind of the constant need to have something novel other than the upgrade in tech and graphics. I feel like the change from Wii to Wii U, I kind of wonder if that doesn't have a lot to do with the audience that they were courting. People who are older than our generation, who they literally don't see the difference sometimes with HD, unless you really pointed that to them,
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people probably could notice that, the Wii U games did look better, sharper, more colorful maybe than the Wii games, but that was not an audience that would have been wow, those Wii games, they look old, and I don't want to play that anymore. I want to play the new stuff.
Mm-hmm. That's gone away. That's just, just doesn't happen anymore, really.
Also, I mean, it is, Nintendo have talked about this for ages, but just the fact that, the sort of, somewhat diminishing returns of increased graphical horsepower as the games industry has matured, because as you met, the leaps of you've got your Super Nintendo that can only sort of do real-time 3D graphics in some very specialized settings with additional chips in the cartridge, and the frame rate is extremely low, and it's Star Fox 2, Stunt Race FX, whatever, to N64, which is designed around doing it. That's a massive change. And then from N64 to GameCube, it was a pretty big one, just in terms of, okay, it could do real-time 3D, but it was still pretty primitive, aesthetically kind of limited. Now we've got enough power to actually kind of be stylish, to do different things visually, much more so, thinking of Wind Waker and versus Metroid Prime, right there, just what a range that is, on GameCube. But, as the generations have gone on, those, differences have become harder to detect, probably even, for not necessarily elderly people or anything, but I assume PS3, PS4, PS4, PS5. I don't know how the general audience kind of that's not watching Digital Foundry kind of responds, to those sorts of things. So, and like I said, Nintendo have been aware of that for a long time. They were saying that, for a long time. Obviously, that was kind of part of their rationale for leaving Wii where it was at basically GameCube level, was that it's it's not that different. Although, I think they probably did underestimate the adoption rate that HD TVs, were going to get during the lifespan of that system, and that was probably one of the reasons why they, were too slow to go to the next generation in that case. But the point is that if you don't know precisely, as we don't, the old siren song of we don't know what the successor is yet, it's difficult to you kind of presume if such a thing were to exist, as the question Brian is sort of suggesting, it's got to be pitched relative to that, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Like that is the point of it. I mean, obviously we've seen it as recently, I guess, as the 2DS XL, right? Of kind of like, okay, here's our last go at the 2DS or 3DS family of systems of like, okay, what are they? Maybe looking at all the features or different combinations of features that previous hardware versions had and saying, yeah, 3D doesn't need to be there. Larger form factor, people did like that, rather than the kind of doorstop 2DS that was seemingly really laser targeted at just being as cheap and as kind of durable as possible for people coming onto the platform for Pokemon purposes as much as anything. But, kind of smush them together to create this last one that's, presumably pretty good for the margins, pretty cheap to make, and have one last kind of go at it at a time where they didn't know how successful Switch was going to be, and then of course when it was successful, they didn't really end up selling that model for that long. This is a little bit different because again, we don't know, but you kind of anticipate that there should be more continuity from this system to the next. So maybe you don't even need to have like a kind of a budget model, as we've talked, because we have touched on this, before, to some extent, because we've had the question of like, would they ever release something that's just for the TV? To make it cheaper, that we've had that version of the question, which is obviously very different from the idea of like having it with a foldable screen and making it more portable. The
PlayStation, Sony tried to do that with the PlayStation TV.
That's
which was
right.
a Vita, basically.
That's right. Yeah. And I mean, I think, didn't they even like toy with the idea of like, basically the Switch concept related to that of like, you could have it be portable or the TV. Like, I think that they may have like toyed with that. And
I think that they sold They sold cables, I think.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, even PSP, I think, had that, didn't it, with the cable? But I guess it's just, it's not that convenient necessarily. I don't know. I have owned cheap old PSPs off eBay, but I've never tried to hook them up to my TV. I guess Vita would be less of a jump in terms of the screen resolution would probably fare better on TV, at least in that case. But for my money, but one of the interesting things that's happened with the Switch's life is the Switch Lite was not that big of a deal.
It really wasn't.
Especially in Japan. You kind of feel like maybe that was the main reason why that existed. Was okay, this needs to be a cheaper, portable, dedicated Switch for people to buy in Japan. And again, probably a big part of it for people to buy for Pokemon. Because again, Pokemon, to that point, having not been on the mainline entries, having not been on the consoles, they were on devices that were cheaper, and the games themselves were cheaper. So, with Switch, I could easily see them kind of thinking maybe we, obviously Pokemon's super popular, we're confident it's going to sell well, and good God, it has. On Switch, but maybe we want a lower cost model just to make sure that we don't lose too many people who are I was happy enough to buy it, when it was cheaper, but this is too much, it's not really very likely to be the same people. It's just it's the next generation of kids, right? Every 3 years, basically, that comes along, that they have to worry about, and with them, the corresponding set of parents, that are looking at it and how achievable is it with their incomes. Yeah. But it wasn't that, it didn't, you look at the sales in Japan and, the Switch Lite sells a respectable amount, but it's nowhere near the amount that the other models sell. The TV capable models, even though they are more expensive, far dominate the sale. I just keep being impressed with how much they sell in units in Japan. Because don't forget, there's about 130 million Switches sold worldwide. About 30 million of those are just in Japan. I mean, they've sold an incredible amount in that country. And yet, even this week, they sold about 90,000 in a week if you add up all the models. So that's the OLED, the regular Switch and the Switch Lite. And that's, I remember when, the DS used to sell over 100,000, but the idea that it could sell something so much more expensive and this many years into its life and do like 90,000 in a week in Japan, to me, it's just like, wow, they are just rolling there. I don't know that we need to change anything if we were just looking at that. But obviously you've got to, Japan, as much as it's their home market, it's very important to them. They probably attach more weight to it than strictly its, kind of revenue generation alone would dictate. The rest of the world is more important, especially North America, because that is, so much of where their bread's buttered. So, they do have to, get this transition right, because we've seen them squander their success before. It can happen. Like, it might seem hard right now, but we know from experience they could totally mess this up if things don't go their way and they make, dubious decisions. But I think that just the Switch Lite experience, I'm sure they don't regret like bringing it out or whatever. It's been a useful thing. It's shifted some units that maybe otherwise wouldn't have been. But I think that might leave them a bit cool on this idea and not really see the particular need for it. And maybe only such a thing would happen if, maybe the new rollout of the new system doesn't go as well as it should. Then maybe you circle back around to a concept like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would tend to agree. I don't think there'll be another version of the Switch. I think the next logical step is probably something with a similar form factor to the Switch, and it's 4K with an OLED screen, so nothing, but I think at the same time, I think Nintendo will wait long enough for that to come down to the price point that they want it to be at. In other words, they're not going to press that on the market because, they could go they'll go another Christmas with the normal Switch. For sure.
Oh, yeah. I think that's pretty much a guarantee. So it's really a question of, what happens in 24. Do we get it for that holiday season, or is it maybe another, March 25 kind of thing? The way that, the Switch was March of 17, I guess is possible. But the thing about it with Nintendo as well, like you see, it's got to add up in terms of, it's got to be within the range of mainstream consumers, the kinds of people that they've pretty much always sold to, but also it's got to add up for them because they still insist on not, taking a big loss on this stuff. So, that's where, maybe some of these reports out there about, maybe it won't have an OLED screen. Again, we've already touched about this. I don't have any insight into how legit these things are. I certainly don't take it for granted that there's substance in them, because bottom line is, for whatever reason, and there can be a lot of reasons why things get heard about and reported and kind of passed around that don't pan out. And it's not just because people are, full of shit and talking crap on the internet. Although I'm sure that there's some of that, but some of it is, somewhat legitimate information that just doesn't pan out when it gets to the consumer level, because, stuff happens in between. But for me, I just think that it is possible that they might end up, all those components have got to come together at a price and for the consumer and a cost for them that makes sense. And if it's like, well, this doesn't quite make sense with an OLED screen, but it does if we don't have one, they'll do that. Because that's the way they do. They don't do the, especially Sony and Microsoft so often, the first versions of their machines are like the Cadillacs. aren't they? You know, they're the ones that are like, oh, we've got these fancy like buttons, or we've got the whole PS2 in the damn thing, you know, you know, because it's for early adopters and that's who they're targeting, and they're not afraid to take a loss because they're massive multi-segmented corporations, you know.
People
Nintendo
will get a second job to buy our console. That's
exactly,
how much they'll want it, right?
It's just like
it's like they're completely their philosophy is completely the opposite. They're like, sell the most expensive console to the early adopters, and then, you know, give the budget and then extend the life cycle of that console with a budget version later on. Whereas Nintendo is the opposite. They give you the deluxe version later and sell to the mainstream right out of the gate. But yeah, I just can't see. I think the Switch has 2 more Christmases in it. I don't see anything coming until 2025, really. I don't think there's going to be a budget version because it's like Greg said, I think the OLED version is effectively that version. It's just weird. Like, it's just, there's just no, and it's not like sales of Switch are dropping off or in some dire state where it's like, oh my God, we have to do something. And also in the face of of competitive consoles in the market, right? So it's still selling with the PS5 out there and the Series X out there. So there's no pressure, really.
No, I guess the cautionary tale is like what happened with Wii, where, you know, it was selling really, really well until it wasn't, and then they got kind of caught cold and kind of seemingly kind of rushed a successor out that just, and you know, maybe even if the Wii U had more time in the oven, you know, it was just fundamentally a poor concept, or, you know, there's something the market wasn't going to go to, but it didn't help. You know, especially like some of the branding stuff and all that maybe could have been refined with more time. So there is a peril in being too slow. I think they need to be, they do need to be ready for when,
just ahead of the curve, right?
The bottom can fall out faster than you think. It's happened before, and what I would hope they've taken from previous experience, and also just the fact that, you know, they're not juggling 2 hardware lines anymore. So maybe this is just easier because, you know, you're not, well, we've got the portable side, you know, we're busy launching the 3DS. And we've taken our eyes off the ball with the console side because of that. Now it's all one. It's all united. It should be a little easier. It's just like, let's game this stuff out of like, okay, you know, if and when, you know, we need to have something ready to go, we're prepared for that, you know. And obviously, like with DS, it was a super duper scramble because they were kind of panicking with PSP coming in. But the fact that they'd had something ready to go was such a big deal. Like, it might have saved them from real trouble. Just the fact that they had a device in the DS to put out there to, you know, kind of get, you know, consolidate their position in the portable market before Sony could really take a big bite out of that piece of the action. That it was massive, absolutely massive that they had that ready to go. So there's a lot to be said for, you know, having the hardware ready to go. And I mean, the fact is, you know, they may have had already certain, you know, kind of ideas about hardware that they could have deployed in the market that they've ended up not using because the pandemic came along. Animal Crossing juiced the regular, you know, the Switch sales, and it just didn't make sense anymore. So, you know, they've probably already been, you know, in some of these places where you've got to think about what would we do if we needed to move. And, so now it's just going to be a case of at what point do they say, yeah, this is it. You know, the time is up. And, you know, I think in the end, for as wonderful as the Japanese experience, you know, the incredibly robust and resilient as sales are in Japan, it's going to come down to North America. That you have to look at that. Yeah. And that has to be the sort of the bellwether for this.
Yeah. I think the next Switch, I think it'll be announced next year and then come out in 25. That's my prediction.
And I think that, this audience that Nintendo was courting that didn't really see the difference between Wii and Wii U doesn't really exist anymore, and everyone is used to tablets and phones. Like, you know, like, oh well, the number is higher, so that means that it performs better. I don't think that Nintendo maybe is going to run into as much trouble getting people to buy the new thing, after the Switch. I don't know.
I think there's some reason to believe that may be the case. I think everybody's just got more experience of these sorts of cycles in various contexts now. In some ways, I think the real peril, the biggest peril anyway, I mean, you never know, but might just be Nintendo overthinking it. Like, as I said, they're in their zeal to, kind of emphasize novelty, and that somehow, this is not some sort of, not particularly necessary upgrade that they're leveraging you into. Oh, no, it's just new. It's creative. We couldn't have done it before. They might overcomplicate it and then lose people. That's the big danger, but that's one of the things they've got to avoid. But, at the same time, maybe they do need to have some kind of hook to sell it rather than just, keep playing your Nintendo games on this. So it's
I've got an idea for a hook that I would be happy to see. Like, make it a glasses-free 3D screen.
Glasses-free 3D and a lower screen as well. Let's just get back to that. So, we can have...
Oh, sure.
We can have Metroid Dread Deluxe with the map on the bottom screen again, because, I'd say it was, I did mention it because it was 3DS rather than DS, but the map on the, Samus Returns, when that finally showed in 2017, about 11 years after Metroid Dread was probably meant to show up on DS, was really good. Like, having the map on the lower screen there was really cool. Using the pulse, sonar-y thing to kind of, help, discover things on the map before we'd actually been there and stuff. It was really good. So, me, I'd love it if the second screen in 3D came back, but I don't think that is in any way going to happen.
All right. So, that will be it for episode 836. Again, if you want your email to be read on RFN, you gotta make it something dumb enough that James will pick it, and then we'll... something about Muppets maybe, and it will be read.
I mean,
of course, yeah.
James is Fozzie Bear. He definitely is. He's he's like persons of lordly caliber. Waka waka waka. Like, that's James basically.
Okay. Well, I was pretty sad on the title for this episode being like the Strokes, those iconic enemies, but now I have got a competing one in person of the caliber, Waka Waka Waka. I'll have to think about it.
Just think about it.
Yeah. All right, Greg. So what is the music to end the episode this week?
Well, so letter writer from last week, BSK, who was asking about the mascot that was just mentioned in the letter we just finished recently about Arfin and Lon Jinderman and all that. Well, they had a request in as well for songs, and this one is from Fire Emblem Engage. And they mentioned that although they put in over 500 hours into that game, a good 10 of that would have been listening to this particular piece that plays before a chapter fight, and accordingly it is called Preparations. But I do also want to mention, I think last week where we got to the end, I got so distracted about the sign-off for the request last week, mentioning Tub Time, that I didn't actually say how the person referred to themselves. Which was a sin, I believe. So yeah, sin was the request last week. By the time we get to the end here, it is quite late, and I do feel it a bit more than I used to as a younger man. I'll admit that, but that was a gaffe on my part. I would apologise for that. But you evoke Tub Time. It's just unfortunately that is going to be where my eyes go, my attention. But yeah, for this week, a very nice Fire Emblem song. I still haven't actually played either of the Fire Emblem games on Switch, so I guess I'll have to get around to one of those sometime.
Just wait for the one on the next Switch.
Oh, you just keep waiting.
Yeah, why not?
500 hours. Oh my goodness.
All right, so that will do it for episode 836. And James, I think everyone will be relieved to hear. We'll come back next week, and you won't have to deal with my mediocrity and my, weirdly aggressive comments about James' ability to pick emails. So everyone can rest easy. I'm not hosting for the foreseeable future again. All right, so take care, everyone. Bye.
Later.
Bye-bye.